Hello and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
And welcome to our show. And as always, before we even get into today's show, which will be an interesting and debatable one, where we talk about arts and entertainment in some form or another, if you're new to this show, please like and subscribe. And if you already like and subscribe to the show, well, then thank you so much for liking and subscribing. Also, please comment. We love to know if we're doing something you're digging. We like to know if you think what we're doing sucks. We would like to know if there's something we should be doing differently. And Randall, how can people get in touch with us if they do want to leave a comment?
Well, you can check out our website, chrisandrandall.com. You can go to our Facebook page, leave a comment there. You can leave a comment on our website. You can send us an email.
And, we read our comments and we follow up on our comments. Sometimes we even do shows based on our comments. So really looking forward, especially today, with what we're going to be discussing. It's going to be a little bit different than what we normally do. So I'm very excited. Randall, take it away, man.
Okay. Well, I think this is mostly your idea, but yeah, it's a great idea. This is we're doing a show today on art and entertainment and class, and how your social class seems to influence what kind of art you consume, you are into, you patronize. There's this general perception, I think you'd agree, Chris, right, that some forms of art are for the upper crust elite, high society, rich people, and some forms of art aren't really. So, like, for instance, the symphony, right? The symphony is for rich people. To a large extent, going to art museums is for the rich, the elite. Going to the opera, maybe going to a very serious play like a Shakespearean play, and maybe possibly reading certain kinds of books, like a Pulitzer Prize winning book. Like, you're not going to read the the current bestseller. You might be reading whatever won the Pulitzer Prize. You might be reading Infinite Jest. So in thinking about this, I mean, I thought about this topic for a long time, and I've kind of come to the opinion that it was probably the Industrial Revolution that started this process. So previous to the Industrial Revolution, you have a world where everybody seems to enjoy the same kind of art, and that's what I've been able to figure just from reading histories. And I mean, I might be wrong about this, but it looks like that, like, for instance, back in the olden days, Elizabethan theater, Shakespeare's time, when Shakespeare did a show at the Globe Theater, at his theater, you had seats for rich people and seats for very poor people. Okay. And they all attended the show and they all enjoyed the show. And the poor people were called the groundlings, right, Chris? Because they stood on the ground of the theater and they didn't get the nice box seats like the rich people. And they were infamous for being rowdy and yelling things and just being uncouth, right? They weren't sophisticated, right? And I take sophisticated to mean you're worldly. You have a general knowledge about many things. There's
in fact a saying about playing to the pit, playing to the groundlings, meaning that the actors in this performance were doing a schtick, or at that time business or clownery or just low humor, so that those people who were closest in the audience would be doing the big guffaws.
Right. And in a lot of Shakespearean plays, you have a lot of that low humor. You have like Three Stooges type, pratfall type stuff. But a lot of times when these plays are staged, for the upper crust audience, they take a lot of stuff out. I mean, wouldn't you say so, Chris?
Well, you're raising so many interesting points. I almost don't know where to start, but I will say, no, I mean that as a compliment. There is something, if we look at the history of theater up to the Industrial Revolution, theater was just the form of entertainment. And low comedy can be found as early as Aristophanes' The Clouds, where people are just farting on stage. And then you have Commedia dell'arte, which is just an outgo of, is the post-Dark Ages from the Renaissance. So that kind of low humor has been around, it's forever. But sometime at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, around the time that both Europe and America, and let's just focus on America since we're an American-based show, they started to develop a class distinction in how art would be portrayed. So,
Right.
Things that are like vaudeville, as you say, or burlesque, or any of the clown or low humor things, all of a sudden got a class designation added to it. So now you're right. When you're doing Shakespeare, go on.
Right. Well, I just want to, so Shakespeare is a good example because it somehow becomes art for the elite at some point. And it loses its general audience designation, right? And
I mean, we were talking about this. You brought this up to me, the Astor Place riots in New York City in the mid-19th century.
So you can look these up. There's a great Wikipedia page on these riots, actually. So what happened is late 1800s, there were basically these youth street gangs in New York who attended Shakespeare plays like everybody else in New York, right? So you'd have a Shakespeare play attended by youth street gangs and the richest people in New York at the same time. And there became a controversy developed where a British actor was visiting the States, a British actor, and he was doing Shakespeare. He was a thespian. And so this controversy developed over who was better, the greatest American thespian or the greatest British thespian.
And today, that would be like the equivalent of who makes the best rap, East Coast or West Coast rapper. Right. You know, and I know I'm 20 years out of date, but it's like the Biggie Tupac. But,
right. And it's not like this is like a contemporary Shakespearean audience. I mean, Shakespeare's from the 1600s, right? So, I mean, this is hundreds of years after Shakespeare was contemporary. So, I mean, that kind of cultural significance, that kind of class division in the arts that we have today, it just didn't exist back then.
So we're not going to see like a fight between, you know, is Kevin Kline a better King Lear than Kenneth Branagh?
Yeah, yeah. The Crips and the Bloods aren't fighting over that.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess what I want to say is that my contention would be the Industrial Revolution is what started this class distinction in the arts, right? So what happens is you get the Industrial Revolution and you get all these mass-produced arts, okay? And some of the first mass-produced art, and a lot of people don't think of these as mass-produced art, would be maybe like Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, the circus, and vaudeville, because even though those arts weren't recorded, the performers would travel on the railroad and repeat their act over and over and over. So in a way, these acts attained a mass audience. They were some of the first mass audience acts. And if you go back to that time, I believe that Buffalo Bill's show and the circus did attain at the time some degree of general audience appreciation. Like I believe.
I mean, when the circus came to town, that's quite literally almost a saying now. It's the day the circus came to town. I mean, everybody would go to the circus,
right?
And yeah, that was a classless event. Meaning, it just didn't matter how much money or how little money you had. You might have a better experience with more money. But regardless of how much money you had enough to go to the circus.
Right.
In fact, the circus would bring the wonders of the world to your hometown. So I might never be able to go to Africa. I might never see a lion. But thanks to the wonder of the circus, I don't have to go to Africa. They're bringing the African lion to me. Right.
And I believe vaudeville, it was vaudeville may have been the start of the bifurcation in the arts with class, because there were certain acts. I think there were certain acts in vaudeville that were more lowbrow, and certain acts that were more highbrow. I know that vaudeville, there were certain acts in vaudeville where they would do like snippets from major plays that were going around.
Oh yeah, they would improvise They would make up their own interpretations. Yeah.
But there was some fairly highbrow acts in vaudeville, is what I'm saying. Even though it was a highbrow mixed with lowbrow, is what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
it was basically, it was exactly what you're saying. It would. What am I doing? I'm simply saying yes because that's all. Everything you're saying is right. I'm not going to shut up now because all I would be doing is just being like Favorite Flav, going yes.
But I think though when we get to the radio and TV era, that's when you really start to get like this bifurcation. Was this class division in the arts, right? So in thinking about this, I've come up with some characteristics that that the elite rich use. The elite rich look for certain characteristics in their art to differentiate their art from mass entertainment, from mass art and mass entertainment. The rich like things that are they don't like mass-produced art. They don't like industrial art. They want art that signals their superiority to average consumers. And you know what's interesting about that, Chris, is there are intellectual elites on the internet who make fun of people who are just brainless consumers. Are you aware of these kind of groups online?
No, tell me about it.
Well,
I really don't.
They're mostly cultural groups that are centered around like internet forums where the users think of themselves as somehow more intelligent than average. So they will, look down on consumers. They'll look down on consumers. They'll look down on the general population who consumes like middlebrow art, lowbrow art. But that's very similar to how rich people who are looking for elitist art, it's very similar to the kind of art they're looking for. So these are some of the characteristics I think that the elitists, and when I say elitist rich, I mean people who are rich, right? But they also are looking to signal that they are better, right, than the masses in some way.
And
they're elites.
They're just drawing a distinction, I guess, not just in their wealth, but also in their aesthetic superiority.
Yes, they consider themselves aesthetically superior, and they're proving it by with their taste in art, right? So
Okay.
there's four characteristics I think that their art has. It's not mass produced, okay, and that's an obvious distinction, because of the Industrial Revolution. It's not popular, okay, it can't be popular, and it should have some sort of pedigree that proves its value, such as it was once popular. Okay, so classic works. So that's why the symphony, Shakespeare, the opera. That's why these. See, the interesting thing is the symphony, Shakespeare, opera. These are all things that used to be mass entertainments. They used to be general entertainments. But now they're things that the elitist rich seek out to prove their superiority. I mean, they enjoy them too. I'm not saying that these works aren't being enjoyed, okay? But the fact that they're a signal of superiority, that is part of why they're chosen, right? That's part of what goes into the calculus of why the elitist rich are drawn to these works. Also. The last characteristic is a sort of timelessness these works have. And maybe you can help me with this one, Chris, because this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. The elitist rich are gravitating towards works that are they stand the test of time. They are very old. They can be appreciated from generation to generation, cross-generationally.
So I think what you're saying is they like standards and traditions.
Yes.
And I think that might be rooted in the fact that they themselves represent standards and traditions. Because
I never thought of that, but yes, that totally makes sense. It's like these forms of arts are a signal of of their entire personality, right?
I mean, there is an interesting thing if you think about it, that the more established members of our society tend to have less differences in the generations that preceded them. Maybe because there's not a lot of upward or downward mobility once you're in the up. But and full disclosure, and you can out yourself or not, but this is a group of people I probably have more experience with than, say, coal miners. So, this is very uncomfortable. But my point is, and I think I really want to cover all four of these, but timelessness is certainly a good starting point, because there's a paradox in here, and I just really want to explain the paradox, which is that everything that is art before the Industrial Revolution probably falls into the category of timelessness. And then everything that is an art form that comes into the 20th century, I actually think does not fall under the umbrella of timelessness. So to be really clear, film, television, radio, rock and roll, a lot of those things inherently are new because they don't go back more than 100, 150 years as an art form. And, I think that to appreciate the older art forms in America, and I really want to keep this entire discussion focused on the United States, because I don't know, I have a feeling that in Europe and other countries, their relationship to older culture may not be the same as ours, which is a little bit more ahistorical. But yeah, I do agree with you that in order to appreciate a lot of these fine arts or high art requires education and exposure. And I feel that in our society, there are barriers to both education and exposure. So I'll pick on classical music since you've already begun. But if you're truly going to enjoy somebody, not like Bach, who is really easy to enjoy, but let's say someone like Prokofiev, who is really kind of a very difficult person to enjoy because of his atonality, or Schoenberg, who is also atonal, you would have to be exposed to that artist at a pretty young age so that there's a point of reference, so that you can even understand it, because younger minds, right, have more elastic brains. So we're more open when we're younger to learning things. So, and I'm gonna argue with you in a moment, but I do agree with you on the most part, which is that wealthier people have access to the kind of education that would expose children to that. Also, the parents of young people have the money to take them to the better symphonies. I noticed I said better symphonies, to any symphony, and get them better seats at said symphony so they're up closer. And they themselves too, because they were raised that way, are more likely to play that kind of music for them. Now, there is periods in America where there's been great democratization. So this hasn't always been true historically. And certainly, as we are speaking, in a public school, there is an immigrant child or a child from a working class background who is getting the exposure that will elevate their own taste so that they can become a great composer or a great instrumentalist or a great singer, what have you. But I'm saying on the whole, the odds of that person coming out of those socioeconomic groups is so much lower than somebody who has all of these class benefits.
Yeah, and what you just said, I'd like to bring up Thorstein Veblen right now, because what you just said fits with a lot of Veblen wrote. Veblen was an economist living in the late 1800s, and he wrote a book that's amazing. It's called The Theory of the Leisure Class. And he coined the term conspicuous consumption. And his idea was that people in the upper classes signal to, he wasn't aware of signaling theory, but I'll just use it right now. What he talked about was very similar. People in the upper classes use signals to show that they were rich and they had money. So one of the signals was taking up hobbies that would take a lot of time, like education is one. Education could actually be considered a hobby that takes a lot of time.
Oh,
So,
sure. I mean, actually, right now, with the advents of the great courses and master class and adult education, and people getting an extra degree in something, all one has to do is look at the ads in the New Yorker and see how many wonderful postgraduate adult ed courses are offered. People want to learn Mandarin Chinese or have a greater understanding of the Etruscan arts.
you know, when people do hiring, okay, for jobs, and this is something now we're getting way off the topic, but I guess I'll bring it up. When people do hiring for jobs, a lot of times I think what they do is they're looking to fill a position with the person of the proper social class. So when you look and you see how much education somebody has, that tells you what social class they're from. And so there you go. I mean, it's very Veblen-esque.
And I will say, you don't have, not everybody who is well educated is a big fan of the fine arts. And nor do you need to be supremely well educated to be a fan of the fine arts. These are bigger generalizations that we're trying to make, which is that it's a way of conveying class status in a very subtle manner, and it reinforces itself. And, you know, I do want to say that these economic divisions occur in both the middle class as well. Like, for example, right now, as we're recording this yesterday, the Emmy Awards were announced, and the winners, almost every single one of them had a show or a performance on a pay TV service. And I know that I have some of those services, but I certainly could not afford to have all of those services. And when I was younger, when you watched the Emmys, it was free TV. So you were much more familiar with the shows and the performances because everybody came in on the same entry level. Now, in fairness, you probably don't have to be super wealthy to be able to afford to watch everything, but you do have to have more money than a lot of us to be able to do that. And that is on, so that would be, I would argue, not really what you're saying. I just want to be clear. I just want to show that how endemic it is in our society that we put price tiers on access to entertainment and to the arts. I think the wealthy take that and then they put it on steroids, because you're talking about now the other element, which is fascinating to me, which is non-producible, reproducible art, or the concept of the limited edition. Can you just expand a little bit more on that for us?
Well, there's this type of art, right, called fine art, right? That's literally what it's called. And you know, I mean, everybody knows this term, who's within a certain sphere, right? I mean, fine arts are, what are fine arts? I mean, pretty much when people talk about fine arts, they're talking about painting, sculpture,
theater, dance.
Okay, but what are
poetry.
They really? Right. What are they really? They're really pre-industrial art forms that are non-reproducible. And that's why they have value, because now rich people who want to signal their elitist taste can consume these art forms, because these art forms are limited, they're rare, they're not accessible to the masses. Okay. You know, so Andy Warhol played with this idea. He called his art gallery, his studio, he called it the factory. And they churned out silk screened paintings, right, where he would merely sign them after he made like tons of prints. But yeah, there is a subset of fine arts, photography. Okay, now, so photography is one of the most industrialized art forms, because photography didn't even exist before the Industrial Revolution. And the whole point of photography is that you can very easily create an image with a device called a camera, and then you can very easily make copies of that image, nearly infinite number of copies. That's pretty much, infinite copying is the main characteristic of industrial art, I would say. So what happens with photographers who want to become fine artists, right? they have to make this thing called a limited edition print, where all they do is they artificially limit the number of copies of their photograph, and they sell those. And usually you're talking about a print run of I don't know, about 400 copies, maybe around there. I would say 400 is around average, but I mean, it's not. I mean, this is just like a painting someone would hang on their wall, but and then they would sell them for like $1,000, $20,000, $50,000, depending on like what they can get in the market. Yeah. So did I answer your question, Chris?
Well, I mean, there's a number of things you just said, so let me follow up on them. I just really want to be clear to those people watching. We're not saying that you have to be wealthy to appreciate an opera or go to the ballet, or that you are only wealthy people can afford to go to the opera or go to the ballet. I go to both. I'm not a wealthy person. I've either spent more money than I should to go, or I've been able to get the discount tickets. What I'm saying is your level of accessibility, what we're saying is that your level of accessibility to these art forms are far more restrictive than those who are wealthy, and they are, in some senses, a haven for the wealthy because they have such better access to it. Now, as far as the limited edition, which is funny because that limited edition is pure capitalism and marketing, because limited edition is the belief in scarcity. And once something has scarcity, it has greater value. And in fairness, there have been there's limited edition beers. There are limited edition sports cars. There are limited edition everything. So limited edition is just a generic marketing ploy. But, and in some sense, I don't really think there's a better illustration of your validation of your thesis than the world of the visual arts. Because you're right, people like Andy Warhol or Mark Kostabi, who we don't talk about that much anymore, in their heyday made their money by putting their names on works of art that they themselves, in a way you could argue this goes back to Rembrandt, but in a way that art they did not make, they would put their name on. And you weren't buying the art, you were buying the artist's name. In Rembrandt's case, you were buying the belief that you were actually buying a Rembrandt. Warhol, if you asked him, would tell you no. And Kostabi would just straightly say, I don't make my own art, I just write my name. And there are artists who literally would just sell air. You can look it up. It's art exhibitions. But another example of this is Damien Hirst. And I was at a Soho gallery a couple of years ago, and the dealer just explained that what Hirst does is he creates a work of art, then he and a series of other wealthy investors will spend an outrageous sum of money on that art piece, more than anyone else, like a crazy amount of money. I forgot how much, but let's say $50 million, because it's I don't know if that's accurate. I have a weak memory, so folks, please remember, it's not the numbers that matter. It's just the content of what I'm saying, not the context. The context, not the content. Oh my God, I really wish you guys had met me when I was younger. So, X much money, let's say $50 million. Hirst lines up a couple of investors. They pay $50 million for his artwork. He himself is one of the guys who's paying $50 million for his artwork. Why do you think he does this, Randall?
To drive up the price.
Of that particular work of art?
Of all his work in general, right?
Correct. That's the deal. So, in the world of art, if one painting by one artist goes for a large sum of money, it will enhance the value of all the other artwork by that painter. So, and it's not even it's a hidden secret, meaning it's out in the open. It's like, why am I Damien Hirst painting worth more now? Well, because he just sold one that went for a lot of money. Why did it go for a lot of money? Because he paid for a lot of money. Think of it in the world of cars. If Ford bought one of their own cars, let's say the Ford Toyota, the Ford, I don't even know what Ford makes anymore, the Ford F-150. If Ford paid themselves $100 million for an F-150, would that make all F-150s worth more money?
It might, if they bought a used one.
Not really. No, because it's not a work of art.
That's
it is
true.
It's a mass-produced product, which
Well, anybody can get one.
compared to, and not only that, but you could compare a Ford to another company, to a Chevy or Toyota, and find a comparable functionality.
Well,
But
anybody can get
the
one.
one of a kindness that you just said of the fine art, I've made something that's one of a kind. So even if you can't get my $50 million painting, but I do have a few other pieces, but that's it. It's still, you're paying for my name. You're paying for my imprintor. And that is a shell game that only works if you have a large sum of money to get into the game.
Yeah, in a way, I guess there's we haven't discussed it until now, but yeah, the marketplace and the manipulation of the marketplace, it plays somewhat of a role in all this. There's a couple of things I wanted to touch on before we move on. Kind of like touching back on our discussion of modernism, postmodernism, I feel like this is very modern. This idea that there is a class distinction in art consumption is a very modern idea. It comes from the Industrial Revolution. And I just want to emphasize how weird it is, because the Sistine Chapel was a commission of one of the greatest artists of the time, right? So why? So if something similar had happened today, the Catholic Church would have commissioned Andy Warhol to decorate one of their churches,
Well,
or Jeff Koons to decorate one of their churches, or to make a statue of the Pope. You know, and why didn't they? Well, because it's a nearly ridiculous idea in this modern era that that a fine artist, quote unquote fine artist, would make art for the masses, right?
Well, you raise a good point, which is that prior to the Industrial Revolution, patronized art. The artist really was in the service of the patron. So most common two sponsors for artists were the church, and the message of the church is, please make art that celebrates the glory of the church and God. And then the king would be, make art that celebrates the glory of the nation and the monarchy. And in a sense, if you want to see what that looks like today, look at the art that's made in like totalitarian societies, because like in China, they're still making paintings of Mao, you know. But in what we would call a Western democracy coming out of the 19th century, and you now have artists. Yes, in some sense, portraiture is still a continuation of that. You know, hey, make a painting that makes me look good. But now, when even in portraiture, in almost any patronized art by the cultural elite, the wealthier cultural elites of our society, they do allow the artist free reign to do their own thing. So you've seen that painting you've seen the presidential portrait of Barack Obama.
Yes.
So if you haven't, Google it. I like it. I forgot the name of the artist, but it's clearly a very stylized work. And the style of the artist is very distinct. And I feel that, and I'll pick on Barack Obama, since he's certainly, in my opinion, representative of this class of people, or at least friends of those people, that what today's wealthier person is doing is they are hiring. You know what? I'll pick on Warhol, because this is a fact. You know, there's a lot of wealthy people from the 70s, 80s, even the 60s who would hire Warhol to do portraits of them, but only in Warhol style. And the point was, however Warhol was going to view you and frame you, you wanted his framing, you wanted his effect, you wanted his commentary. And I do think in that sense, that is a bigger difference between what the art of today is versus the era of kings and popes.
Yeah, and I just want to say that so this class distinction in the art, it's not to say, we're not saying, right, that there's something wrong with this art, right? All this art is pretty good, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with the symphony. There's nothing wrong with the opera. It's just that it's very interesting, this class capture that's gone on with different forms of art, right?
Absolutely. And I will say, in fairness, most of this art is accessible to the general public, and most of the artists who make this art are themselves not inherently wealthy people. We're just narrowing who are the people who are underwriting them. And if they're underwriting them, are they really underwriting them for the masses, or are they underwriting them for themselves?
But well, there's a need, right? The rich have a need in this modern era, in the era of modernism, to the industrial era, to signal their elite taste, right? Their better taste.
Well,
And
like
these are the
if you
art forms
go
that they've
to
gravitated towards.
if you go to a museum, right, you will see the names inscribed of the people who are the donators to the museum. That is a form of status. Look, I'm a big fan of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and that I can thank the Guggenheim family for. I'm a big fan. Right here where I live, we have the beautiful free art museum. What's it called? It sucks. I have brain damage, folks. In my neighborhood.
Oh, the Arm and Hammer?
The Arm and Hammer. I can thank the wealthy Arm and Hammer and whatever family has allowed me to go for free. We have the Getty Center. Thank you, Getty family, for allowing me basically to just have to pay for parking to an otherwise free museum. So I'm not saying that they're trying to keep the arts deliberately away from other people. I'm just saying they seem to have far more influence than they should.
Let me ask you a question, Chris. When the general public, okay, let's say middle-class person, lower-class person, goes to a highfalutin, let's say, art museum, like the Getty, are they trying to signal a superior taste? I mean, is that?
I don't know, because I have a bias. I go to these places. I go because I love looking at art. And often what I've noticed the most when I go to a fine art museum, I'll get to other forms of art in a moment. Actually, no. When I go to a fine art museum, an opera, ballet, theater, I do notice the same people. And normally, to be honest with you, a lot of them are just foreign. They're not even from this country. Or if they're from this country, they're not from the city. They're tourists on vacation, and they're taking advantage of the fact that cultural outlets that they don't have where they live, they now have access to.
That's a good point.
I also know, though, for a fact that the Getty Center, among others, holds private nights where their most wealthiest patrons can have lovely cocktail parties, listen to symphonic music, or at that point, it's not symphonic, it's called a chamber ensemble, and have great docents explain the work so that their access and perspective is so much better than our access and perspective.
Well, I just want to add to that. Most small art galleries, they do the same thing. They have, when they open a show, they usually have a secret opening night show for only people they invite, which are going to be rich buyers. That's why when you, the general public, go to an art gallery for an opening, almost all the paintings are already sold because they were sold.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of poor people on an opening night of any fine art event.
Well, it's because they already had the rich people opening show.
They would argue, and fairly so, that they are dependent on these people because there are not enough people in other socioeconomic groups to underwrite these works.
Well, let's get to, you brought up something yesterday. I want to end with this, okay, Chris?
Okay.
You brought up something yesterday. See, my contention throughout this whole discussion was that rich people are looking, rich people who want to signal elite taste, want to signal superior taste, they gravitate towards art forms that'll do that for them, right? I guess the best word for these art forms is Veblen art. They're Veblen art. But you told me last night that you think that the rich have a process where they capture this art for themselves.
Well,
And you brought up jazz and Bruce Springsteen as examples.
Yeah, let me work with jazz and folk music instead of Bruce Springsteen, because that would be in a whole other episode. But middle class people are the most hidebound to convention. and wealthy people and poor people are not that hidebound to convention. And historically speaking, wealthy people have really enjoyed slumming it and going to especially when they're younger, going to the places that are taboo and enjoying the taboo arts. And it has been my experience that things that were once really built for the folk or for common people that even question the mores of middle-class life and wealthy people eventually gets co-opted by the wealthy when at some point maybe they fall into disuse or because they just somehow get bought out and become boutiqueified. These are a lot of adjectives. Let me be more precise. Folk music, I'll go with them first because folk music has been around since the founding of America. And if you look at folk music, especially in America from, say, the Civil War to right before, right through, say, the 1920s, it was really performed by folk people, normal people from Appalachia, from different mountain states. It was not, there was no conservatory for it. It was self-taught. There were no copyrights on some of the songs. They were just songs that had been sung forever. But you see, I don't really want to get into the Woody Guthrie, Arlo Guthrie, but if you look at people like Pete Seeger and a lot of the other big folk movement people who come to the fore in America after World War II, they're well-educated people from Harvard and other places, and they end up playing to a small elite of people in the coffee houses of the 50s that really are the educated people, the professional class. Now, you get to the point where now, if you ever see any folk music being done, it's being shown on weirdly enough, PBS, which while it's free, I feel truly caters to a well-heeled crowd. But then again, that well-heeled crowd underwrites them. So folk music, which should really be the kind of music that the majority of Americans like, I would argue now has become like this gentrified boutique music of a very small coastal elite. I do want to, it would take a whole other episode to unlock Bruce Springsteen, but I'll also pick on jazz, because jazz is an art form that until rock and roll really was the dominant pop musical art form. Jazz is just what everybody listened to. And jazz is still, I would argue that jazz in the African-American community is a whole other difference. I don't even feel qualified to speak about. But jazz, at least among other communities that are mainstream, once rock and roll became popular, slowly started to lose its prominence. But you see that the jazz clubs, once we get into an older crowd, gets more exclusive, more expensive. Jazz gets taught at universities, and jazz performances like Monterey, Newport, Playboy, these are expensive events that are attended by wealthier people. And the more expensive they become, the more they remove jazz from regular folk. So that today, almost every venue that you would go to see jazz is expensive. And the jazz artists that you're going to see are pretty well known. You don't really hear a lot. I mean, if you're a big fan of jazz, and I have many friends who are, so please forgive me, but the average person now associates jazz as a very rarefied, gentrified thing. And it's gotten so far from what it used to be, which is a place where bars and speakeasies and the poorest places on earth you had access to. And I feel that co-optization it all happened within our lifetime, or at least within the 20th century.
That's all very interesting. I throughout this whole discussion has led me to think about something. I'll ask you about it right now, Chris. All right. So maybe prior to the Industrial Revolution, maybe class distinctions were incredibly obvious, right? I mean, it was incredibly obvious who was a gentleman and who was a peasant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but post-Industrial Revolution, class differences become a lot less visible, I think. And maybe, do you think that's possibly what drives the need for many of the rich to seek out signifiers of their superiority? Do you see that as a possibility?
Well, I mean, I guess the question is this behavior that is by intent or by default?
Well, I feel like, I mean, it could be subconscious behavior.
Right. Well, and if so, yeah, I mean, we live in America. We live in a classist society. We're the wealthiest American. I once saw, what was the guy who owned Disney? Not Michael Eisner, though his boss.
I'm not sure you're talking about.
The guy who's literally owned Disney, one of the wealthiest men, a billionaire, a couple times over. It sucks. Not Michael Eisner. The one who owned Disney and Disney Corporation. He sold it. Anyway, I have seen in my life. I am sorry, folks. It is really an issue.
Bob Chapek?
No, but close. But I've seen billionaires in my life. It doesn't matter from where, and multimillionaires in my life. And they wear jeans and sweaters and sneakers, just like the average man does. And they even maybe drive Volvos and Audis. And the cars themselves, nothing about them really draws a lot of flash like wealthy people do in other cultures. The difference often is Bob Eisner. Fuck it. It doesn't matter. The point is, we have created the illusion of a classist society, but when it comes to our aesthetic tastes, we might as well be wearing tuxedos and sackcloth. And I will say this because I feel like I'm not being fair about Bruce Springsteen. The short answer about Bruce Springsteen is this was once a guy you could catch at the Stone Pony, and now all of a sudden people are spending $2,000 to see him on a Broadway stage. And I do believe that rock and roll, at least classic rock and roll, is in danger of becoming like jazz, something that's only privy to the wealthiest people in our society.
Wow, Chris, that was an amazing point you just made about wearing tuxedos, wearing metaphorical tuxedos.
No, thank you so much. And again, I like these things, and I know you like these things too. I mean,
well, I'll just say on a personal level, I mean, I never understood these class distinctions, for most of my life, but you start to go to if you go to these places, you start to see the class differences. If you go to an art gallery, you go to a museum, you start to see the class differences in the people attending. They're a different kind of person.
And go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah,
Please.
yeah. Just you go to like a Ozzy Osbourne concert. It's not the same crowd as if you go to a fine art gallery. That's all I want to say.
And that's true. There's a lot of stuff. Like the movies are inherently, that's a democratic thing. Every class goes to the movies. Every class likes Norman Rockwell. Every class likes comic books. Every class likes popular music. Every class likes television. That's what I'm saying. Those are inherently classless because the access to those things are either free or very inexpensive, relatively speaking. And I mean, the last note I'll say is this. One of the biggest plays right now at this time of our recording is Hamilton. Have you either seen Hamilton on Broadway or seen Hamilton when it's come here to Los Angeles?
I've listened to the soundtrack, and my girlfriend desperately wants to see it, but we haven't gotten tickets yet. I mean,
and why have you guys not gotten tickets to Hamilton?
COVID stopped us from seeing it, but let me tell you, my girlfriend went to great lengths to get tickets. She bought season tickets to the Pantages, and so that she could get, she'd have an opportunity at the first round of sales.
So she bought season tickets to see other plays, just so she could pay.
Just so she could see Hamilton. Yes.
Right. So I don't want to get into anything economics with your girlfriend, but certainly that's not an inexpensive proposition.
It was not, no.
I mean, so you need to have a certain amount of money to go see Hamilton. And either you could do it this way, or you could just buy plane tickets, a hotel room, and just then buy the tickets in New York. Even if you live in New York, you can buy the tickets. But the barrier of entry is really high. Yes. Now, I'm a big fan of Arthur Miller. You're a big fan of Arthur Miller. Arthur Miller wrote a play in like 1950, I believe, called All My Sons. It's a great play, came right after Death of a Salesman. It's a family drama about World War II and money, and featured some great actors of its time. My grandmother, with a sixth grade education, married with a child. She worked in the children's section of a department store. Her husband was a glasses maker, an optician. So these were fairly working class people, and she did not have a particularly high level of education. Not only did she see that play once, not only did she see that play on Broadway twice, she went to 3 different Broadway performances, because in 1950, theater tickets were that affordable. And also in 1950, people of almost any distinction, education-wise and class-wise, would go to the theater, especially to see a fine work of art.
That is a great point, Chris. Yeah, Broadway used to be mass entertainment. That's why it's there. I mean, it used to be very inexpensive. And you said that was 1950, your grandmother?
Yeah, so we're about 1950. So we're literally talking about 70 years ago.
And things have changed, I think.
Yeah. So that's really the last I can say on this. Not knocking people for being wealthy, not knocking people for liking yachts and dressage. I'm just saying we definitely have a class system in our country when it comes to entertainment, and especially with the fine arts.
You know, it comes to mind that at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people thought that our civilization, our culture would become democratized, that everything would become leveled. And it seems like the Industrial Revolution has had the complete opposite effect. And it's increased class divisions everywhere, even culturally, which is just astounding. To me, anyway. I mean,
that's a very good point. That is a very good point. It's a good place to maybe even end the show.
I think we should end the show. We've talked long enough.
Of course, I want to say, if you agree with something Randall has said, or totally disagree with something Randall has said, or I've said, and you think we're just being a little too Marxist, a little too heavy-handed, if you're clutching your pearls on your way to seeing a fine art performance, please, if you respond, we won't mock you, we won't ridicule you. We will look at your point of view and we will make sure to give as much deference and respect to your way of viewing this position as we are, so that we can continue this conversation. We'd be more than happy to. Until then, I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Thanks for watching or listening.
All right. Bye.